Because we have here, in these chapters, a deep concern about the end times, eschatology. And this concerns the whole earth itself, not just a group of nations, whatever. It concerns all peoples, so it's clearly about the end of the human story too. And we do also have, after a period of suffering and confusion, a time when the earth is blessed and God's people rejoice. We also have some apocalyptic motifs or concepts. Excuse me. There's resurrection for the dead. Very, very important in this chapter. We have the fall of the angels. We have the trumpet call summoning the elect to come together. We have the darkening of the sun and the moon. And we have the banquet at the end times on Mount Zion in Jerusalem. So all that is arguing for, well, it has got a fair bit of apocalyptic. But we've got to realize it's not as full-blown as in the book of Daniel or the book of the Revelation itself. Although some commentators would interpret these chapters as a single coherent composition, most commentators wouldn't. They see it as a collection of different pieces coming from different periods, but stylistically put together here. There is a unity around, well, the end times and its universal scope. And indeed, there's a development going on in these chapters from judgment and punishment to the great positive blessings, future blessings, and a future role for Israel. So that's a little bit on trying to look at what sort of literature and what's the sort of message of these chapters. And it's probably best to say it's an incipient form of apocalyptic, not the full-blown thing. Now we're going to look at 4 aspects. This is the 3rd section. 4 aspects of these chapters 24 to 27. The first is Judgment Day itself, chapter 24, verses 1 to 23. It's a remarkable poem, this one, with fantastic images, with extraordinary feeling. God is about to destroy the earth and all peoples, high and low, rich and poor. They're going to be affected by all this. And why? And here we go from verse 5. The earth lies polluted under its inhabitants, for they have transgressed laws, violated statutes, broken the everlasting covenant. Now the commentator Blenkinsop suggests that the author has the story of Noah at the back of his mind here. The violation of the laws of Noah, especially through murder, polluting the earth. Then comes the description of the city of chaos, where all joy goes, and the city is left in ruins. A hint, perhaps, of a return to that primitive chaos before God began his wonderful work of creation. By the time we move to verse 14, the mood shifts, and we hear voices of praise from east and west, from the very ends of the earth. Glory to the righteous one. What's happening here? The following voices seem to say this. We're moving into a time not of joy right ahead of us, but of terror. Terror and pit and snare await you, O people of the earth. Each of these words in Hebrew begins with the same letter, and they sound so alike. So it's a very strong sort of reality that's coming, and harsh and hard. So we're building up an atmosphere. The description of the final calamity echoes the story of creation as the civilized world reverts to chaos and the waters above and beneath come together. The heavenly host and the earthly kings, all those powers who are hostile to God, are then imprisoned and finally punished, and the final manifestation of God's rule take place. We'll move to the next part of these chapters. Chapter 25, verses 1 to 12. Here we have a song of praise, verses 1 to 5 especially, which thank God for the marvellous plan he has for the world and for us, that is going to destroy evil and befriend the poor and the oppressed. And very beautifully, God is described as a refuge for the poor and the needy, a shelter from the rainstorm, and a shade from the heat. Then we move into a description of the great banquet at the end of time, the eschatological banquet. A text that we are most familiar with, as it is used twice on Sundays in the liturgical cycle, and again in Masses for the Dead. It enlarges the scene we have of the banquet of the elders on Mount Zion in the book of Exodus, and is the very first scene of the eschatological banquet, which again we will see in the New Testament in Matthew chapter 8. In Matthew chapter 8 we read this: "Many will come from east and west and feast with Abraham, Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom, where the heirs of the kingdom will be thrown out into darkness." And then in Matthew chapter 22, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a wedding feast, which the king gave for his son, and he sent servants to call those who've been invited to come to the banquet." The Eucharist is really, for us, a partaking in this heavenly banquet. There's a beautiful description of God wiping away the tears from our eyes. And then it says that God will swallow up death forever. So it does look to a time when death will be no more. The commentator Tucker says this: "These lines are virtually without parallel in the Old Testament." Extraordinary lines. The horrific oracle against Moab, swimming in the cesspit or sewer, may simply be saying that not everyone is going to enjoy salvation. I hope we're not going to... Anyway, we won't go there. Okay, the third thing. Now, just two psalms, one of praise and one meditative. Chapter 26, verses 1 to 21. Again, we have a very beautiful psalm of praise, used as an Old Testament canticle in the divine office. So we pray it, if you use the divine office, once every 4 weeks. It's a pilgrim psalm. Chant as the people enter the gates of the city. Those with steadfast mind, you keep in peace, because they trust in you. And this is followed, this beautiful psalm, by a meditative psalm on the way that the righteous, in our journey towards God, move towards God, and it's a plea also for justice. Your dead shall live, their corpses shall rise. O dwellers in the dust, awake and sing for joy. We find these words quite extraordinary. The commentator Brevard Childs says,